So we're exploring the principal product that we're given as. We are consumers, we are demand centers. So if we are essentially a derivative instrument, then maybe we can explore our interchangeableness, our ability to be replaced in reference to the financialization, say, of life. In this way, we give a broader context to what's occurring within, say, the world at large, and so we can read the developments of AI and of central bank digital currency or the tokenization in reference to the principal product that the economy produces. So if we think that the economy does not produce goods and services, but rather produces us as that principal product, then everything has to be in reference to the way how that we are simultaneously a product and an asset. Because if you're a demand center, ultimately you are credited a limitation of agency in order to monetize your aspirations for life. You've already been sold on a buyer's journey, and so as a result of you being sold, you discount the fact that whenever you buy, you are reinforcing a frame of reference and a way of life in such a way that you become the actuary of your own captivation. And so if we look at it along those lines, we can look at the development of what a parasitic class of people have installed for us when we need to be restructured. If we are a product or a demand center, we are valuable. We are valuable in reference to the way how that you can monetize what we're credited. So if we're demand centers, then ultimately the way how that you legitimize a way of life is to ensure that people invest in their redundancy. Now, obviously people won't think that they're investing in their redundancy because the way how that we get sold on investing in our value is in reference to the marginality of our time. So that's the way how that we divide the self through labour and leisure. So obviously through our time being given to us as marginal, we orientate ourselves towards obviously the value proposition of our time to secure our privatised, our idol, our Eden, as it were. But what's transcendent to the way how that we get sold on that is the consumer that we have to be in order for it to be a vehicle for life. Because you know, if you look at your life marginally, you're seeing life as a compensation. So therefore you need credit to live the life that you are ultimately shopping for. In that way, we become an asset to be monetized. Obviously businesses, corporations and governments only see people as a way to extract. Right? So taxation is a classic example. It's just your lifetime value. So you can take, say, some of the jargon that relates to marketing and apply it to you as a person. I mean, because you're not even a citizen, you're not a person, you're a consumer, you're a demand center. And so therefore in that way, what you're credited is a limitation of agency. And so if you get sold on using a credit you are not the originator of, obviously people can, take tolls. They are going to toll you. And so through tolling is way of maintaining, say, a captivation with something that obviously isn't. And so you'll get sold on public goods, obviously to justify the public purse. And so the appropriation that occurs, you'll get sold on, say the value associated with a brand. And, if we take brand and expand it out, the brand of liberal democracy, but once again, if you don't have a choice on the way how time's given to you, it's a command economy. And so liberalism is just a managerial kind of apparatus to conceal the fact that you don't have a choice on the way how time's given to you. So it's a command economy. You're commanded to produce yourself as a credit instrument that you're given as. So therefore, obviously the asset that you become. But what happens when you have the advent of AI, which is not, which is a glorified machine learning? What happens here? So a lot of people frame the development of AI along the lines it's going to take people's jobs, all right? But once again, your principal job is not what you do. Your job is to produce the consumer to rationalize the way how you put price on your labor. When you put a price on your labor, you are ultimately rationalizing the miraculation of the credit that you use. Now, in doing so, become derivative or a credit instrument, so therefore that you can be repackaged as an asset sold in all the different ways. You only have to think of the way how our data is packaged and sold for commercial ends to realize that is contingent upon the way how that we become derivative, all right, when we don't question the nature of the way how time's given to us, because the way how time's given to us as a totalizing claim, kind of we get sold on our money making to disregard through our money making what is the role that we are actually engaged with, and that's to produce the principal product. So when you think of AI as it's going to take our jobs, you're not looking at this thing holistically. So you look at it from the form of life of the consumer. So why is that an issue? Well, what happens is that you, as the principal product, in order to ensure your unfailing loyalty, you have to be entrained not to actually question life. And that's what essentially is modernity, or our unavowed religiosity, when we don't question that transcendental truth claim as to whether or not time is of value or is marginal. Okay, and so in that way, you have to invest in the envisaging necessary for you to be able, for people or for our organizations, our way of life, our commercial paradigm, to monetize your aspirations, all right, to generate the return necessary on the investment in the redundancy of the consumer that you are. All right, so that is necessary when you're looking at the economic system now. Now, what happens when AI comes along and does your job? Does AI need to be sold on life? And you'll say, well, obviously it's a machine. It doesn't need to. And so then you think of all the economic activity that's centered around you to legitimize, obviously, your investment in the redundancy of the principal product that you're given as. All right. So once again, you're not a fucking person. Just, clear that out of your head. You're a derivative. You're a credit instrument. You're a demand center. So if you're a demand center and yet AA comes along and there's no demand, it doesn't need a demand center because it's going to be doing something, then ultimately what is AI? AI is there to not only take your job, but is to make redundant the consumer. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, you don't have to justify all the economic activity that is in and of itself is a redundancy, because if the principal product and the asset that you're given as is ultimately becoming redundant because the consumer is becoming redundant, then you need to restructure people. All right, you need to restructure them. So how do you go about in this transition when AI takes over, jobs, let's say, but then it's ultimately taking over the consumer that is produced through roles. So therefore it doesn't legitimize the economic multiplier of activity, so redundant activity that we create when we're beholden to growth. What needs to grow? You've got to think, what do you need to grow in a zero growth world when the consumer is made redundant? Now, people never look at it along those lines because they never make the connection between their role is the way how that they produce themselves as the consumer that they're given as. So if AI comes along to do stuff that people would otherwise do, then what you'll see economic activity will decrease. And that means to say that the whole model of monetizing existence kind of shifts. So what happens when people that are already redundant, you've got to think, now don't have the ability to earn income because AI has taken their job, and now you don't have the economic multiplier, or you don't have to envisage life to be sold on what you don't question, because now you've got a machine doing it. So you have that's when obviously universal basic income comes along, because it's just to maintain you until you fall off the perch, or until basically you make a transition into what would be the new economy, as it were. But the new economy is predicated upon, well, think of all the investment in AI that is going along now. Now, if it's based upon the understanding of time as a value, and so therefore what AI can do something quicker than what a human can, and so it's based upon productivity. Well, productivity is in reference to a unit of measure of time, ultimately. So it's the way how that you account for time to linearize it. And so you're not looking, and so once you understand that, then you understand that AI does not obviously address the truth claim of whether or not time is a value or something that's marginal, so something that is a unit of measure. So in order to measure the human by, so it's obviously driven by economization. But that economization, if you're looking at what's the principal economization that we engage with when we're given as consumers, well, you always economize your time independent of the interaction that you have with people. So ultimately what you've created, if you've created a spiritual wasteland that gives rise to a machine to then come along to make explicit the redundancy that you set and train in your own actions. And yet what people will do is that we'll look at AI and see the ills of it is to do with a parasitic class of people or finances and tech bros and all these other things, and don't realize that no, you're the one that actually are doing it because you've impoverished your relationality with other people because you always economize your interaction. You always economize time independent of your interaction. So what you share with other people is not creativity. It's predicated upon the same efficiency, the same clearing mechanism. And so therefore, in turn, that is what gives rise to AI to make your job redundant and in turn, the consumer form of life redundant. And so in turn, the nature of the credit instrument that you are has to be restructured. So the restructuring occurs through that, unified ledger, let's say. So the way that you can not only tokenize finance or money, but tokenize assets, and ultimately in a way where you fractionalize it and where you don't own anything. And because, well, to own something is to be independent of this kind of system. But how can you be truly independent when you're still, this is the one thing that, how can you be independent when it's predicated upon the usurping principle when you don't question the nature of credit in the first place? So we could say, well, the question of credit relates to money, but it doesn't. It relates to you're a credit instrument, you're a demand center. Why are you only credited economization and not creativity? Because if you're only focused on that you're an economic agent, and so therefore you're economizing your time independent of the interaction or the relationality that you have with people, then ultimately you are not a co-creator. You don't create the world. Once again, existential arbitrage presupposes life to be a risk-free proposition because we're economic agents. We don't question the way how the world's given because we don't question our production process. And so what we do is we absolve ourselves of responsibility, but in turn, we will give responsibility to the development of AI as being some Machiavellian, say, plot or some development that is ultimately going to make us make our jobs redundant. But then we don't understand that ultimately, well, if you've externalized the creation of a world, you're going to externalize the responsibility for AI to make explicit the status of your redundancy that you already basically have done. So as a result of that question of credit is principal when you're looking at the nature of what the differences between, say, economies. Because if one's predicated upon the marginal nature of time, the way how time is given as an economic good, well, ultimately that is what underwrites the development of AI. So, people like to think that AI is creative, but how creative can it be, or how intelligent is it when it doesn't question the principal foundations for our whole entire civilizational system? So if you think that, well, okay, how can you repurpose, say, distributed ledger technology, but in a way that does justice to you being the agent of change or creativity? Now, the only way how you do that, and I covered this off prior, is the nature of the way how that the credit would change. It changes from the ownership of credit to the credit of ownership, because through being credited ownership, you're taking ownership of your creativity to animate a world that makes the consumer redundant. All right, so if the consumer is going to be in a state of redundancy, all right, because the AI comes along to take your job, and so therefore you cannot produce the consumer that you're given have, and so as a result of that residual, that residue, that remnant, you're given as a demand center as far as covering universal basic income, so you can cover your subsistence, a maintenance kind of level. Well, outside that, if you step back from that, if you make the consumer redundant, then that is a creative action that you would do with other people. So once again, why is that important? Well, you have to acknowledge you have to acknowledge the totalizing claim that's made on you when you're given as a consumer or a product or a demand center or the asset that you are to be monetized. If you don't potentialize your actions beyond the economization, so orientate it towards creativity, the redundancy that you set and train is going to be actualized outside your control. You are going to be claim a victim status because you absolve yourself of responsibility when you are passive. You're a credit instrument. You don't animate creativity. So this is what happens. So you'll have the technology that's going to set in train the restructuring of a person through them already being a redundancy, and so therefore it's the way how they manage that, all right, through development of AI and the redundancy of the consumer, or you acknowledge you are already in a state of redundancy and that you do it to yourself, and so therefore you need to potentialize your actions. And so that's the way how I describe you have to potentialize your time beyond the economic good to temporalize place for a common surpassing. The common surpassing is of this dystopian world that we are ultimately the architects of. So you have to create a world that will compete on its merits. And so therefore it becomes a choice of loyalty. Where do people's loyalty lie? If you realize that, yeah, I'm the principal product, I'm a demand center, I'm an interchangeable economic unit, all right, I know the way how I question, how do I produce myself as a consumer? Question that, all right? And then what you do is that you will start to understand that. And then you realize the significance of your actions. You have to potentialize your time beyond the economic good. So you do have a choice on the way how time's given to you, but that changes the nature of the credit or what you're credited. You become, because through animating creativity or animating an action beyond the demand center, then what you could do is potentialize the redundancy of credit as given as a means of exchange. All right, that's the difference. That's the difference in worlds. That's what's given to you, and you have to make a choice on it whether or not you acknowledge that or not.